My Villain Academia is arguably the best arc to happen in My Hero Academia so far, and there were some people who were genuinely upset when this arc was over and we had to go back to the heroes. Like guys, it's called My Hero Academia. But anyway, today we're going to explain the entire villain arc from start to finish, so whether you just want to relive its greatness or you just can't be bothered to read the manga, this video is for you. And let me know which arc you'd like me to do next, and subscribe so I can reach my goal of 500 subs by the end of 2019. Okay, let's get into it. The arc begins in the dorms of Class 1A, with the UA traitor turning on the TV, though sometimes I hear he goes by the name Denki. We see an advertisement for a lifestyle company called BNHA, who specialize in making everyday goods specifically tailored to people's quirks. And it makes sense that this type of company would exist. I mean, who do you think makes suits for guys with 4 arms these days? The balding businessman in the commercial reveals that BNHA are now entering the hero industry and will now be making custom support items for heroes. We then cut to that same businessman in his office, who actually turns out to be the CEO of the whole company. And he jokes around with his assistant that the public reaction to the ad has been so negative, but that the move will eventually turn out to be successful due to the company's track record. In this panel, he refers to quirks as meta abilities. Now this is a very specific way of referring to quirks, and it actually comes from an old book. Essentially, the author believed that everyone in society should be entitled to use their quirks freely, whether they're a hero or not. And I like this part because it gives us a brief insight into the largely unexplored world of quirks before we meet Deku. The CEO's assistant proceeds to trash talk the book, calling it both poorly written and implying that the writer himself was a terrorist. And with that, my friends, this rabbit man basically signed his death wish. The CEO gives him a nice big smile, thanking him for all his great work, and then he squeezes him to death. This is why I don't let people at work touch me. We then get 2 pages detailing the backstory behind the book in question. Now I won't spend too long on this part, but essentially back in the day when quirks were starting to be regulated by the government, a guy who went by the name of Destro formed a, quote, liberation army. And this army espoused the views that we were talking about earlier regarding the deregulation of quirk abilities. However, Destro's army was later dissolved and he himself was thrown in prison, which is where he wrote this famous book before committing suicide. Yeah, this got pretty dark real quick. But as it turns out, unknown to even Destro himself, he actually had a child out in the world. And, plot twist, that child is the CEO of BNHA, who now goes by the alias of Re-Destro. Now this is where things get really interesting. Re-Destro has seemingly formed a liberation army of his own, and has his sights set on taking down the League of Villains, but we'll get to the reason why he wants to do that a bit later. At Liberation Army headquarters, his goons bring in a disheveled looking Jiren, a character who you may recognize from one of the, I think from the first season of the anime. He's essentially a broker who goes around finding bad guys to recruit for different criminal organizations. And most prominently, he's the one who recruited Twice, Dabi, and Toga all to the League of Villains. And now the Liberation Army, having already beaten the crap out of him, are about to torture him for some information about the League of Villains. And with this information, the story now flashes back to a month and a half earlier, with our focus now turning to the League of Villains themselves. So we see them camping out in a rundown abandoned house, and Spinner, who's this lizard guy, kind of wonders how much longer they can live like this. Not only do they have no money, but Kurogiri has been caught by the feds. But just as the argument starts to get a bit heated, a massive crash is heard outside of the building. And this, my friends, is none other than the arrival of Gigantomachia, the biggest all-for-one fanboy on the entire planet, and one of the few characters to have multiple quirks. This guy used to be All-for-One's bodyguard, but he was hidden away by All-for-One so that one day he could be of use to Shigaraki. Shigaraki refers to Gigantomachia as the League of Villains' secret weapon. But let's be real, he's just the Hulk. So the Hulk reveals that he's been looking for Shigaraki for a while, and very politely asks Shigaraki if he can prove himself worthy of succeeding All-for-One, and that until this happens, he won't acknowledge him as the true successor. We then flash forward to the present day, and these guys have been battling Gigantomachia for a while. But he's so overpowered that he can take on the entirety of the League of Villains simultaneously. Look at him, he's literally eating Dabi's flames. And then this part is quite funny. He actually starts to cry at how weak they all are compared to All-for-One. And can you blame him? I mean, look at these stats for Dabi, man. Those are rookie numbers. If you notice, the Hulk has a radio around his neck when he first appeared, and on the other side of that radio is the mysterious Dr. Ujiko. The League of Villains are then suddenly teleported against their will by the Doctor, using the same quirk that All For One used at Kamino. This is just another piece of evidence to suggest that Dr. Ujiko has a way of copying quirks and then giving that same quirk to multiple people. But that's probably a theory for another video. Now, at this secret base, the Doctor has a brand new type of Nomu that he calls the high-end Nomus, and these creatures are a massive step above the ones that we've seen so far. The Doctor then says that all the high-end Nomus, in addition to all his technology, were offered to All For One, and whilst he has nothing against Shigaraki, he needs to see evidence that Shigaraki is actually worthy of having all of this. However, we see a few pages later that this was just a massive troll, and in fact, he reveals to Shigaraki that he was always going to help him out. But he does confirm that Gigantomachia must submit to them before he hands over all his tech and research and all that. Now, before we move on to the next part of this arc, there's another important thing to note in this scene. Dabi specifically says that he's found a good potential ally for the League of Villains, and so he won't be returning to make Gigantomachia submit, as he believes that pursuing this ally is more important. Additionally, Ujiko says that he'll give Dabi a higher Nomu to test out, so right now we're getting the backstory to the pro-hero arc, but from the villain side of things. And with that said, everyone with the exception of Dabi is teleported back to Gigantomachia for round 2. But what's really crazy is that after they're teleported back, their next fight with Gigantomachia lasts for an entire month and a half. And even after all that time, he's still undefeated. Spinner states that Gigantomachia can attack without rest for 48 hours straight, and then he sleeps for 3 hours. And despite getting beaten down for a month straight, Shigaraki still has a smile on his face, confident that eventually he'll catch Gigantomachia out. Twice then gets a call on his phone, and I think this is as good a time as any to let you know that he stores that thing directly in his butt. The call is from Jiren's phone number, but on the phone is a person using a voice changer to hide their identity. They tell the League of Villains to check the news, at which point Mr. Compress whips out his new iPhone 10 and discovers that several severed fingers, in addition to Jiren's trademark glasses and scarf, have been found in various locations across Japan, specifically ones that have been visited by the League of Villains, such as Kamino. Anyone notice this awesome All Might statue, by the way? Re-Destro then makes himself known as the Grand Commander of the Liberation Army and reveals that they've been planning for generations to rise up and tear down all the existing institutions in order to create a society where people can use their quirks at will. We then get a glimpse at just how powerful this army is. His fellow commanders consist of a leading politician, the board member of a technology company, and the director of a publishing company, which just so happens to have republished Destro's book, selling over 100,000 copies. So what this means is that the Meta Liberation Army have the power to pull any strings they want and are significantly more organized than the League of Villains. That much is for sure. Re-Destro then tracks the League's location via satellite and gives Shigaraki a pretty difficult choice. Either they head to a place called Deka City, or he will alert the authorities to the League's current location and they'll be immediately defeated by all the top heroes. In Re-Destro's words, they must stand against the Meta Liberation Army or do nothing and be captured by heroes. Re-Destro believes that if the League are defeated by ordinary citizens, it will boost the argument that citizens should be freely able to use their quirks. That's why he wants the League to go to Deka City. Despite all of this, Shigaraki has a pretty genius plan on how to deal with them. Like I said before, Gigantomachia sleeps for about 3 hours at a time, but what I didn't mention is that one of his quirks is his incredible sense of smell that allows him to track Shigaraki wherever he is. So given that Gigantomachia is currently asleep, Shigaraki asks the Doctor to warp them over to Deka City, and then in 2 hours or so when Gigantomachia wakes up, he'll track down Shigaraki only to end up at Deka City and start crushing the Meta Liberation Army. Then, when the Hulk is tired from doing all of that, Shigaraki will make him submit. So it's basically a win-win for Tomura. Defeat the Liberation Army and get Gigantomachia to bow down to you, both in one go. So the gang is then teleported to Deka City and we get this awesome panel shot. Oh yeah, and Dabi's back now. So whilst looking over Deka City, the villains are approached by a professional hero known as Slide and Go, who tells them that if they want to meet Re-Destro, they have to follow him into the city. And this place is an absolute ghost town, with the exception of vigilantes standing very menacingly on top of rooftops. But you know, besides that, it's pretty empty. The group is then approached by two commanders of the Liberation Army. Hanabata is the leader of a political party, and Miss Curious is the one who was involved in the publishing business. they reveal that 90% of Deka City are Liberation Army members who spend their days training their quirks in preparation for an uprising. Which begs the question, how do they pay their bills? Like, I know no one is paying you to work out all day. Twice then asks where Jiren is, to which the politician reveals that he's being held in a tower in the middle of the city. Then, out of nowhere, dozens of civilians appear to ambush the League, though two of these poor souls actually tried to attack Shigaraki, to which he just dusts them in the blink of an eye. Come on guys, do your research first. One key thing to realize is that there are cameras recording everything. This is so that when the civilians defeat the League of Villains, in the absence of heroes, the Meta Liberation Army can use that footage to push their agenda that basically everyone should be allowed to use their quirks. Now, this is the part of the story where we start to focus a little bit more on the individual battles of the League members. To start with, Toga is targeted by Miss Curious. Now, Curious has a pretty good quirk called Landmine, and it basically allows her to turn anything she touches into a bomb, although admittedly the explosions don't have that much power, hence why in this panel where Toga is literally being exploded from the inside, she somehow manages to still survive. We learn some interesting facts about her backstory. Firstly, Toga is currently 17 and ran away from home after attacking a classmate with a knife and sucking the blood out of his wound with a straw. That has to be some good quality blood. Curious asks Toga about why she abandoned hope of a normal life, to which Toga replies that this is her version of a normal life. Due to the nature of Toga's quirk, she's always had a strong fascination with blood, and when this is combined with her admiration for someone or something, she just can't help but suck them. But whilst this was normal for Toga, it was outside of what society deems acceptable. So Toga suppressed these feelings in an attempt to be normal, until one day it all just boiled over. Like Toga says in this panel, just like how other people kiss to profess their love, her way of expressing the same emotion is to suck their blood. That's just the way she is, and society could not accept her, so she had to run away. And she joined the League of Villains because where else are outcasts meant to go? In the League of Villains, she has a sense of belonging and a sense of family. So at this point, Horikoshi is beginning to flex his social commentary muscles. So, back in the present day, Toga is still being attacked from all angles as she runs away. And as she runs away, she consumes a random vial of blood that she's been storing, which just so happens to be the blood of everyone's favorite gravity bender. No, not that guy. It's of course Ochako's blood, which Toga acquired quite a while ago. Now Miss Curious is literally about to kill Toga there and then, until out of nowhere Toga just levels up her quirk. Instead of just looking like Ochako, she's actually able to somehow use Ochako's gravity quirk and make Curious fly into the air. Toga then quickly uses her reflexes to touch all the other people surrounding her until there's just a crowd of people floating in the sky. After that's done, she touches her hands together and sends them all hurtling towards the ground, killing every single one. And I'm pretty sure that's the first time Ochako's quirk has actually been used to murder a person, but will it be the last? Probably, yeah. Ochako isn't the type to use deadly force, and Toga's pretty much about to die. She was super beat up from that fight, and whilst she manages to drag herself into a shed, she is so close to death that you may as well just start dividing up her worldly possessions, which at this point of the story consists of a coat and a few syringes. Now moving back to the rest of the gang, they're all fighting civilians, and it's still over an hour until Gigantomachia is meant to wake up and arrive. Hanabata pulls up in his election campaign van, and using the loudspeakers he lets everyone know that Miss Curious was killed in battle. This is where his quirk kicks in, as it greatly enhances the physical and mental powers of those who hear his voice and are deemed worthy by him. So essentially he's just pulled up to incite these civilians to kill the League of Villains. A group of Liberation Army civilians then charge at Shigaraki, definitely reminiscent of World War Z. Only this time, Shigaraki is not playing any games. Just like Toga, Shigaraki's quirk has significantly improved since battling with Gigantomachia all that time. He does a quick backflip and then dusts this poor guy in the face. But the decay spreads to everyone, even the people he wasn't touching, and we get this awesome panel as a result. That's at least 30 people he's dusted with a single hand gesture. Just after this happens, everyone's favorite Todoroki is targeted by one of the Liberation Army commanders called Geten, a character who is somehow not a woman. Geten's quirk allows him to manipulate ice at will, controlling its shape and its temperature, hence why he sculpted these awesome ice fingers. He's a guy who has spent his entire life building up and honing his quirk, and as such, he's not fazed by Dabi's mid stats. So these two have a pretty epic battle that involves a lot of fire a lot of ice structures, and some more fire again. But before we can see the epic conclusion of this battle, we cut to Twice discovering Toga's dead-ish body. Twice has an emotional moment with his fellow societal outcast, where he tells her that she's the only one who makes him feel needed. But he is rudely interrupted by a gang of people who happen to look exactly like him. And these are not clones, alright? These are not clones, but rather they are puppets made by one of the Liberation Army commanders called Skeptic. They differ in a lot of ways from the clones that Twice can make. For example, they don't seem to think for themselves and are entirely obedient to Skeptic. And their mission is to kill Toga and kidnap Twice. And the reason they want to kidnap Twice is so that they can force him to use his cloning quirk on Re-Destro, sort of like as a backup just in case Re-Destro was to die one day. However, more importantly, the reason why all these puppets look like Twice is actually very simple, but to make it make sense, we have to first explore Twice's origin story, which is fully revealed in this chapter. So, when Twice was 16, he was riding a motorbike and ran into a guy, and despite obeying the speed limit, he was still given a criminal record. He then lost his job because the guy he ran over worked for one of his company's top clients. As a kid, his parents were killed in a villain attack, so the only company he had was himself. Literally. He made clones of himself to hang around with, until one day things took a mad left turn and all the clones started killing each other. As a result, he's not even sure if he's the real version of himself anymore. So Skeptic is trying to exploit that psychological trauma after finding out this information by hacking into Jiren's client data. One important thing I should also mention is that the clones Twice makes disappear after taking enough damage, and he specifies that breaking a bone would probably be sufficient to make one of his clones disappear. That's going to be relevant in like 15 seconds. So back to the main story. These puppets grab Toga and literally begin trying to snap her neck. Meanwhile, Skeptic orders them to grab Twice and break both his arms and his legs. Told you this would become relevant. After breaking these bones, Twice does not disappear, which means that he cannot be a clone. And because he now knows that he is the real version of himself, he is completely liberated. As a result, he unleashes a stampede of Twice clones, and those clones can create more clones of themselves, who can then create more clones of themselves. I mean, if you look at them from the sky, they look like a bunch of ants. This is Twice's super move, and it's called Infinite Doubles. At this point, we finally get back to Dabi and Geten doing their thing. Dabi remarks that Geten is outmatched elementally, but Geten has the ultimate clapback and says that he can smell Dabi's skin burning from all the way up there. As we all probably guessed, Dabi's body isn't really suited to his quirk, which is probably why he has all those scars, and why the Todorokis have a shrine dedicated to him, because they think he's dead. Remember, it's still over an hour until Gigantomachia is meant to arrive and find these guys, and the situation is not looking good at all. However, luckily for them, Dr. Ujiko has been watching the entire thing unfold and decides that letting the League of Villains die wouldn't be so great. As a result, he wakes up Gigantomachia himself, an hour early I might add, and the big guy takes 2 sniffs of the air and immediately bursts off in the right direction. The arc then cuts to a rooftop in a different city where the number 2 hero is waiting for Dabi to show up, the number 2 hero being Hawks if you didn't know. Hawks and Dabi agree to meet, but as we've seen, Dabi is a little preoccupied. We get confirmation that this is indeed the potential ally that Dabi was talking about earlier on in the arc. And what's more, it seems that Hawks has killed the number 3 hero, Best Genus, to prove his loyalty to the League of Villains. Though it's worth noting that when Dabi asked him to do this, he specifically said that Hawks could kill anyone except Endeavor. Clearly he wants to kill his dad on his own terms. Now back in Deka City, the League is still being attacked from all angles, but Shigaraki now has his sights set firmly on killing Re-Destro above everything else. He's not even waiting for Gigantomachia to arrive anymore, he just wants this guy dead. Twice then jumps in and saves Shigaraki from this snowball quirk. That's what it seems like in black and white anyway. Now, realizing that Twice has been fully liberated, coupled with the fact that he's more attached to Jiren than any other member in the League, Shigaraki sends Twice on a mission to make a pathway towards the main tower and find and kill Re-Destro, to which Twice tells him to just sit back and enjoy the show. You gotta admire that confidence. And Twice actually does make it into the clock tower, and the very first thing he does is roast Re-Destro's hairline. But as we've seen a few times in this arc, Re-Destro does in fact have a clapback, and he says that whilst his former assistant used to make jokes like that, Twice has none of the charisma that he did. So look, the bunny guy from the very start of the arc gets a quick shout out, RIP. Twice then makes clones of the League of Villains, who all proceed to attack Re-Destro, despite him saying that he would kill Jiren, who's obviously a hostage, if they made a move. And now, finally, we get to see Re-Destro's quirk activate. His left arm turns gigantic, with his suit remaining firmly intact by the way, and he slaps the fake League of Villains out of existence. But fake Shigaraki is still alive, and goes straight for the head. He then tells clone Shigaraki an interesting piece of My Hero Academia history. Back in the day, there was a woman who gave birth to a child with a quirk, and this was at a time when society was still prejudiced against such mutations. The mother and child suffered constant abuse and discrimination, but the mom stood up for her child and defended his unique ability. And in fact, she was the creator of the term quirk, but was sadly killed by anti-quirk activists. The big reveal, however, is that the woman that we're talking about was in fact Re-Destro's grandmother, and he reveals that they recently republished Destro's memoirs to incite a rebellion against the state. But just as he's finishing up his history lecture to fake Shigaraki, the real Shigaraki turns up outside the tower and just gives it a light tap, which causes the entire thing to come crashing down. Something which I cannot wait to see animated. But very quickly, before we see what happens next, there are two things worth mentioning. Firstly, a flashback showed that Twice made a clone of Toga and intends to give Toga a blood transfusion from herself, basically using the blood of her clone to save the real Toga. Secondly, we learnt a few things about Spinner during a flashback. In addition to seeing him get stabbed multiple times by this pufferfish quirk guy, we now know that Spinner's only quirk is to cling to walls, which is pretty crap, and we also learn that he considers himself to be a person who has very little value, but is eager to see current societal norms flipped upside down, which is why he was in favor of Stain's ideology, and it's why he also now wants to help Shigaraki just destroy everything. He essentially just admits that he's a bandwagon jumping guy who just wants anything to change. Okay, so back to the final boss fight. We got Re-Destro up against Shigaraki. So Shigaraki just launches himself at Re-Destro with full force, and his quirk is now fully awakening. You can see that even his shoes have evaporated. We're at the stage now where even his toes are decaying things. And this is what you've probably all been waiting for. We get the origin story for why Re-Destro's forehead is so big. I personally love a good forehead origin story. Re-Destro explains that his quirk is to accumulate stress and then convert it into sheer power. So the more stressed he is, the bigger he gets. And he explains that his forehead looks like that because he just lets the rage build up inside him, which doesn't sound really healthy, bro. He then grabs Shigaraki's right hand and effortlessly just squeezes 3 fingers clean off. Luckily for Shigaraki though, his awakened quirk means that he doesn't have to touch people with 5 fingers to decay them anymore. He actually decays Re-Destro's thumb with just the 2 fingers he has left on that hand. Re-Destro explains that a transformation such as the one that Shigaraki has gone through can only happen through brutal life or death training, so props to Gigantomachia for being the world's best personal trainer. To combat this, Re-Destro goes 80% of his full power, and at this point he looks more like a demon than any other character I've seen in the show. Tell me someone who looks more demonic than this, I dare you. And the destruction that he's causing in this state would rival the strength of All Might, that much is for sure. And having blown Shigaraki away, Destro begins smiling, having seemingly won the final battle. And just as he's about to start gloating, none other than Bruce Banner himself appears, who starts tearing through entire buildings with ease. At this point, we start to see Shigaraki remember the fragmented and forgotten memories of his childhood. And I recently did a video explaining his entire childhood, so rather than me saying the same thing again, if you want to know what Shigaraki saw in these flashbacks, please check out that video after this one. The link is in the description. Anyway, Re-Destro gives Shigaraki a lecture because he only seeks to destroy things but never has any vision for what he wants to create. To which Shiggy responds that all he can do is destroy. He then crushes one of the iconic hands that he has always worn on his body since we've known him really, and I think the one that he crushes there belongs to his dad. Re-Destro then launches an attack on Shigaraki at 100%, only for Shigaraki to just easily put his hand out and decay all the attack that was about to come his way. But just look at the blowback from that defense. Shiggy stopped all of that power coming at him without even breaking a sweat. This man is truly the greatest of all time. So at this point, Re-Destro is getting kind of desperate, and as a last-ditch attempt, he basically gets this Hulkbuster type Iron Man suit, which drops out of the sky and allows him to access 150% of his power, to which Shigaraki just responds with this panel. Yeah, that is someone who does not give a crap what you're about to do. After tearing through the entirety of Deka City to find Shigaraki, and nearly killing Geten in the process, Gigantomachia finally catches up with Shigaraki. But what does he see? He sees a man who has been truly liberated without question. All his memories are back, his quirk has awakened, and the hands that he wore on his body, they're all gone. For all intents and purposes, Shigaraki is now truly living his best life. He puts his hand down on the ground, and just look at this, just look. He is destroying an entire city with his decay quirk. What is anyone supposed to do against that? You can't even touch the ground or you'll get decayed yourself. And if you see that smile on Shiggy's face, that's someone who knows they just bossed this entire arc. The decay spreads so quickly that even Re-Destro himself couldn't avoid it, and he has to chop off his own legs to stop the decay from spreading to the rest of his body. Shigaraki just made this man disabled. In this context, that is an unrivaled flex. The politician then arrives on the scene and tries to incite people to attack Shigaraki and save Re-Destro. But simply one glance from Shigaraki and everyone was just frozen in fear, despite the fact that Hanabata used his quirk to incite them to attack. So much like Gigantomachia said at the beginning, All For One's successor needs to inspire dread, which is something that Shigaraki has now definitely achieved. And beyond that, Destro himself admitted that his life was now in Shigaraki's hands, meaning that he is either willing to die right now and have Shigaraki kill him, or he is willing to serve Shigaraki. And upon witnessing this, Gigantomachia cries yet again, but this time it's tears of happiness, because he acknowledges Shigaraki as All For One's true successor. Now, 1 week after these events, the battle at Deka City was spun in the media to basically appear as a terrorist attack, in which ordinary civilians use their quirks to fight back against 20 villains. So while it seems to have divided opinion in Japan, it still changed the public conversation, and now people are at least considering the benefits of citizens being able to freely use their quirks. We then cut to the League of Villains, who are chilling in their new swanky hideout, paid for by the Meta Liberation Army, of course. This is a far cry from the beginning of the arc, where these guys were all just chilling in a rundown abandoned house. We then flash to the villains underground, with Re-Destro addressing an army of liberation warriors, plus Gigantomachia. He says that he's abdicating his position as leader of the Liberation Army, and Shigaraki is someone who is truly liberated, and thus the army will be reborn under a new name, the Paranormal Liberation Front, with Shigaraki as the leader and 9 commanding officers directly underneath him. Hawks is in the crowd of these Liberation Army soldiers and notes that Shigaraki's power is now greater than even the best heroes, and that it might even be too late to stop them. Finally, the arc ends with Dr. Ujiko promising to grant Shigaraki the power he seeks, but there's one final thing that Shigaraki needs to bring to him before he can do that. And I'm 99% certain that whatever the Doctor wants Shigaraki to bring to him is going to be the plot of the new My Hero Academia movie coming out in December. And there you have it, guys. That was My Villain Academia. My throat is in absolute bits, but let me know what you guys thought of the arc. Is it one of your favorites? And do you think that we should have had a backstory for all the villains? For example, Mr. Compress and Dabi. And is the League too powerful now for the heroes to actually win this fight in the end? With Gigantomachia on their side, plus all those Liberation Army soldiers, high-end Nomus, and the fact that Shigaraki's gonna get a power-up, I don't see the villains losing anytime soon. I genuinely don't. But anyway, don't forget to subscribe and I'll catch you next time. Peace.